It's midnight. There's a storm outside, and suddenly the power goes out. What do you feel? Panic, helplessness, darkness. Now imagine for a moment, what if you had to live this electricity-free life for a full 1,000 years? Medieval people lived exactly like this. But not the way you think. They didn't just survive. They built an entire civilization. They constructed cathedrals, made great discoveries, created works of art. How did they do it without electricity? Here's the shocking truth. Medieval people didn't go to bed earlier than us. On the contrary, they held meetings and threw parties in the middle of the night. So how could they see in the dark? Medieval people's first weapon to replace electricity: candles, torches, and oil lamps. But these weren't as simple as we imagine. The wealthy used beeswax candles. They burned clean and smelled pleasant. The poor preferred candles made from animal fat. These candles smelled terrible but did the job. An intimate detail. If you entered a European home at night, you could determine the owner's social status from the type of candle. Beeswax, wealthy, animal fat candle, Kandertinsha Haditan, poor. Torches were used outdoors. Cloth pieces soaked in pine resin would burn for hours. Castles and streets were illuminated this way. Oil lamps were a more sophisticated solution. Olive oil, fish oil, and even beaver oil were used. These lamps were so advanced that some models based on Roman-era technology could burn until morning. Medieval winters were deadly, but people found surprisingly creative solutions that would make modern engineers jealous. Fireplace technology was based on principles we still use today. Air channels were built inside walls to distribute heat throughout the house. Some castles had elaborate heating systems with underground channels that carried warm air from a central fire to multiple rooms. These medieval central heating systems were so advanced that some survived for centuries. Hot water bottles existed, bags made from animal skin filled with hot water. They were used to warm beds, but here's what's fascinating. Wealthy families had servants whose job was to warm beds with copper warming pans filled with hot coals. They'd slide these pans between the sheets before their masters went to sleep. Heated stones were another ingenious solution. Large stones were heated by the fire all day, then wrapped in cloth and placed in beds or carried in pockets for personal warmth. These pocket heaters could stay warm for hours. The most interesting solution: a tradition called bundling. Multiple people would share the same bed to share body heat. This wasn't just practiced among families, but extended to guests as well. Entire households would sleep in one room during harsh winters, creating a communal heating system. Medieval kitchens were far more complex than our modern kitchens. They were the heart of the home and technological marvels of their time. Large fireplaces were at the center of the kitchen. Pans, cauldrons, and various tools hung above them. Different parts of the fire were used for different dishes. The hottest part for searing meat, medium heat for stews, and the cooler edges for gentle warming. Master cooks could manage 10 different dishes simultaneously using just one fire. Rotating spits were mechanical marvels. Dogs were sometimes trained to run on treadmill-like wheels that turned the spits, ensuring even cooking. Some castles had automatic spit-turning systems powered by hot air rising from the fire. Ash cooking technique. Potatoes and onions were buried in embers and cooked. This method was so effective that some chefs still use it today. But they also used this technique for bread, wrapping dough in leaves and burying it in hot ashes for perfectly baked loaves. Storage techniques: no refrigerators, no electricity. So how did they preserve food? Salting, drying, fermentation. But it was more sophisticated than that. They built ice houses, underground cellars with perfect temperature control, and smoking houses. Cheese, wine, pickles. All were perfected during this period. Some preservation techniques were so effective that food could last for years. The saying, "from dawn to dusk," comes from this era. People woke with the sun and slept with the sun. But this wasn't simple either. It was a complex dance with nature. Craftsmen would open large windows in their workshops. Since glass was expensive, transparent animal skin or oiled cloth was used. These windows provided air circulation in summer and wind protection in winter. Goldsmiths and jewelers positioned their workshops to catch the first morning light, as they needed the clearest vision for detailed work. Farmers worked seasonally in sophisticated patterns. Winter months meant indoor work: weaving, woodworking, tool repair, planning next year's crops. They also used winter downtime for education. Many farmers learned to read during these months. Summer months were for intensive field work, but even then, they worked in cycles, resting during the hottest parts of the day. Night shifts existed. Guards, watchmen, and some craftsmen, especially bakers, worked at night. Bakers started work at 2 a.m. to have fresh bread ready for dawn. Special candle and torch systems were developed for them. Night watchmen had elaborate systems of bells and signals to communicate across towns. Timekeeping was entirely different. Without clocks, people used church bells, sun positions, and even roosters. Some monasteries had complex sundials and water clocks that were surprisingly accurate. No television, internet, or cinema. So how did people entertain themselves? They created entertainment systems that were more interactive and community-based than anything we have today. Storytelling was an art form. Traveling storytellers would go from town to town narrating epics, news, and gossip. This was like live Netflix, CNN, and social media combined. These storytellers memorized thousands of stories and could perform for hours without repetition. They were walking libraries of human knowledge, music and dancing. Evening hours were spent with music and dance. Simple instruments, flute, drum, lute, but the music was complex and varied by region. Every village had its own folk songs and dances. People didn't just listen to music. Everyone participated. Board games, backgammon, chess, dice games were the essentials of long winter nights. But they also played games that have been lost to time. Complex strategy games that took days to complete. Some games involved entire communities, with elaborate rules and seasonal tournaments. Festivals were massive community events. Harvest time and religious holidays were celebrated with great festivities that lasted for days. The entire town participated. These weren't just parties. They were cultural exchanges where traditions, recipes, stories, and innovations were shared between communities. Sports and competitions. Medieval people had their own Olympic games. Archery contests, wrestling matches, horse races, and strength competitions. These events drew participants from hundreds of miles away. The myth that medieval people were dirty is completely wrong. They simply used different methods, and some were surprisingly sophisticated. Bathhouse culture. Europe had elaborate spa-like facilities inspired by Roman and Turkish baths. These weren't just for washing, they were social centers where business deals were made, news was shared, and communities gathered. Some bathhouses had hot and cold pools, steam rooms, and massage services. Plant-based soaps. Soaps made from lye and animal fat, with added herbs like lavender, rosemary, and thyme. Different regions developed unique soap recipes. Some were so luxurious that they were traded across continents as valuable goods. Dental hygiene, chewed tree branches, especially willow. Salt and herbs were used for teeth cleaning. They also used ground oyster shells as tooth powder. Medieval people understood the connection between oral health and overall health better than we give them credit for. Laundry systems. Without washing machines, they developed elaborate washing techniques using rivers, specialized tools, and community wash houses. Clothes were cleaned with such care that garments lasted for decades. Personal care. They used perfumes, oils, and cosmetics made from flowers, herbs, and minerals. Wealthy women had beauty routines that rivaled modern spa treatments. No WhatsApp, no phones. How was communication maintained? Through systems so efficient, they would impress modern logistics companies. Messenger system. Professional couriers who carried messages on horseback. Communication between distant cities took days. but it was remarkably reliable. These messengers had official status, carried special tokens for identification, and could demand fresh horses and food anywhere. Some messenger routes were so well established they operated like postal services. Bell system. Church bells didn't just ring for prayer times. Different bell patterns conveyed different messages: fire alerts, death announcements, approaching armies, celebration calls, market openings, and curfew warnings. Experienced bell ringers could send complex messages across entire regions. People learned to read bell languages like we read text messages. Signal fires and smoke systems. Fires lit on mountaintops and hilltops relayed messages faster than any horseman. During wartime, a message could travel hundreds of miles in hours using coordinated fire signals. Different smoke patterns meant different things: invasion warnings, all-clear signals, or calls for help. Traveling merchants. They weren't just traders. They were living newspapers. Merchants carried news, letters, and gossip between towns. They were often the most well-informed people of their time, knowing political situations, weather patterns, and social changes across vast territories. Medieval people didn't live without electricity. They lived with fire, with the sun, with nature, and with each other. And perhaps that's why they were more creative, more social, and more in harmony with their environment than us. Their solutions weren't primitive. They were ingenious adaptations that worked for over 1,000 years. They built heating systems that lasted centuries, developed preservation techniques that kept food fresh for years, created entertainment that brought entire communities together, and maintained communication networks that spanned continents. We who panic when the power goes out today have much to learn from them. They show us that humans don't need electricity to create art, build communities, maintain hygiene, stay warm, or live fulfilling lives. At least we know this. Humans can build sophisticated civilizations even without modern technology. Maybe the real question isn't how they survived without electricity, but whether all our technology has made us more creative, more connected, or more resilient than they were. Has technology made us happier or just more dependent?